Usually, when researching ancestors, I feel fortunate to find a death certificate and 3 or 4 census records. If I'm really lucky, I might find an obituary, a marriage record, or even a birth certificate, although those were pretty much non-existent prior to 1910, at least in Missouri. My paternal great-grandfather is an exception. While there's no official birth record, there's a wealth of other documentation, and for some reason his newspaper presence is unmatched by any other person I've had the pleasure to research. This video follows the paper trail through Acie Sherrill's extraordinary lifetime. While I've not included every obscure reference that I've found, I've included the ones that I found the most interesting. During early April of 1885, a major cold snap swept across the Midwest United States. Snow and high winds were reported. On the 10th of that month, Acie William Sherrill was born to Middleton Monroe and Julia Margaret Martin Sherrill. He was the third of their 7 children. He was born on a farm near the town of Brazos, Missouri in Perry County. The area would later be referred to as Shaw's Store or Shaw's School. The farm was a portion of land settled by Julia's grandfather, John Martin, who had moved to what is now Perry County from North Carolina sometime prior to 1834. The bulk of the 1890 U.S. Census was destroyed by a fire in 1921, so the first written record of Acie isn't until the 1900 census, when he was 15 years old and still living at home. His oldest sister had married and moved away, and his little sister, Lily, had died. This picture is from approximately 1902. Avery is on the bottom, Acie's the next one up, topped by Vest and Earl. Little brother Percy is on the left. By October 1903, Avery had passed away. In February of 1905, Acie's dad, Middleton Monroe, passed away before he reached his 50th birthday. While the rest of the boys stayed on the farm with their mother, Acie moved to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, presumably to begin his career as an auto mechanic. There he met his future bride, Grace Fulbright. They married on October 5, 1907. Their first son, my paternal grandfather, Fred Wilson, was born on September 9, 1908. Their first daughter, Margaret Catherine, was born on December 12, 1909. The 1910 census finds Acie and family still residing in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, where his occupation is listed as an automobile salesman. Acie was always known as a good fisherman and hunter, and we are fortunate that pictures from this era survive to back up the claims. Before the year 1910 was out, Acie had opened his own garage in conjunction with an auto parts supply house operated by brothers Alvin and Barrett Cotner, a pair whose careers were closely intertwined with Acie's in the 19-teens. Acie was an early adopter of technology, at least in his younger years. Because of this, we are blessed with many photographs of crashed automobiles that he was called to rescue. Acie and his various garage enterprises began showing up in newspaper clippings in 1911. At first I thought all his newspaper presence might have had something to do with being acquainted with newspaper staff, but the coverage continued in a new town 100 miles away when the family later moved. In November of 1912, the famous aviator Tony Janus flew a hydroplane from Omaha to New Orleans. One of his many stops along the way was in Cape Girardeau. This clipping from a 1936 newspaper recounts how 20 years earlier, in 1916, the paper had recounted the 4th anniversary of Acie and a few other people getting to go for a ride in Janus's plane. I have to wonder if Janus had required some of Acie's expertise and rewarded him with a ride. Also, this illustrates how much documentation has been lost to time, as I found no evidence of either the original 1912 account or the 1916 Remembrance, only the later 1936 mention. Acie and Grace's second daughter, Marion Virginia, was born on December 8, 1912. In October of 1913, we find an account of a devastating fire at the Hope Cotner garage that destroyed the entire building and numerous cars inside, including a Maxwell that was owned by Acie. I think it's safe to assume that Acie was working for Hope Cotner at this point in time. The Maxwell that Acie lost in the Hope Cotner fire wasn't the only Maxwell that he owned. Here are a couple of other pictures of Acie with the Maxwell automobile. And yes, it has the steering wheel on the right. Left-hand drive had not become the U.S. standard yet. Judging by the apparent ages of his children, these had to have been taken a year or more after the fire. Here's an account of a test drive gone wrong from June of 1916. This entertaining newspaper account of a swamped automobile in July of 1915 ends with Acie bringing the car back to life. On August 24, 1916, Acie and Grace's daughter Catherine narrowly escaped tragedy when she and a friend were run over by a runaway automobile on Bessie Street in Cape. Just a few days later, a newspaper article documents the fact Acie was working for the Park Auto Garage in Cape. To set the scene for this article, let me chase a rabbit. In 1914, the Little River Drainage District began a monumental project of draining the swamp that covered much of Missouri's Boot Heel and beyond. By the end of the project, over 66 million cubic yards of material had been moved, creating over 1,000 miles of drainage ditches and freeing up hundreds of thousands of acres of prime farmland. Much of the excavation work was accomplished with coal or oil-fired steam-powered machines, and some was done with gasoline or kerosene engine-powered machines. But there were at least 3 massive electric-powered machines at work on the northern end of the project. On the last day of August in 1916, Acie and 3 of his fellow mechanics were summoned to the repair of one of the draglines and had to work through the night. It must have been something out of the ordinary to require bringing in outside experts. This little newspaper item leaves me with so many questions. In February of 1917, tragedy struck again. Acie and Grace lost Catherine after a couple of months of battling rheumatic fever. At this point in time, they resided at 412 North Boulevard in Cape, but by the end of May, they had uprooted and moved 100 or so miles to the south to the town of Kennett, Missouri. Unfortunately, the dark cloud followed them to Kennett. Grace recorded in her Bible that baby Sherrill was born and died on August 15, 1917. In June of 1918, a trip to St. Louis in a Studebaker automobile, where Acie rode along in case of mechanical troubles, was deemed newsworthy. In September of 1918, Acie had to register for the draft. This is the first documentation of his Kennett employer, Riggs Motors. It was during this time frame that Wilson too began his automotive career, working with his dad when he could. Here, Wilson is turning the crank on a brass-era car while Acie works under the hood on a snowy day. While I have no real idea of the date of this photo of a group of hunters in camp, I'm guessing it was at about this point in Acie's timeline. That is Acie on the far right. The photo in this ad was used in several others during his Kennett years, but this is the earliest instance I was able to find. It appeared in the November 11th, 1919 edition. Riggs Motors was located just off the northwest corner of the Kennett Town Square. The 1920 census finds the family all still residing in Kennett, and Acie is still employed as an auto mechanic, presumably still at Riggs Motors. In June of 1920, Acie was still taking people's cars to St. Louis, and it was still deemed newsworthy. A fellow Kennett mechanic, A.R. Smitty Smith, had a garage that he moved into an old laundry building in June of 1920, but by August, he had health problems. As a result, Acie had to step in and run his shop for him until he could heal up. By September of 1920, Smitty must have improved because we find an ad from Riggs Motor Company announcing that Acie has full charge of the service department. The wording of this ad sure makes you want to read between the lines, doesn't it? Less than a year later, in June of 1921, the Perry County Republican announced that Acie and family had moved to Brazos, where Acie had opened a garage. Judging by Wilson's age and the fact that Acie's mother, Julia, along with some other Perry County friends and relatives are in this picture, I believe it fits here in the timeline. Wilson is on the far left. Next is Acie and Grace with Virginia in front. Next is Margaret Jane Sherrill, then her mother, Alma Litch Sherrill. That's possibly Vest and Alma's daughter Dorothy in Alma's lap. Next is the matriarch, Julia Sherrill. Alma Murray is in front of her. Mary Elizabeth Molly Sherrill Murray, Acie's older sister, and finally her husband Cornelius Murray. In August of 1921, once again, Acie's willingness to embrace technology is demonstrated by the fact that he brought electrification to Brazos. I can imagine that after spending years in Cape and Kennet, where undoubtedly electricity had been available to him, it was hard to get along without it when he returned to Brazos. By May of 1923, Acie and family were back in Cape Girardeau, residing on South Spanish Street, as evidenced by this receipt. Sadly, he was still paying for Catherine's burial 6 years after the fact. This 1927 statement for the Illinois Southern Phone Company makes me suspect that Acie and family had moved to Chester, Illinois by then. I guess it is also possible that they would have brought their Model T Ford across the river to rural Perry County for repairs, but I doubt it. Either way, the family was undoubtedly in Chester, Illinois by the time of the 1930 census, where both Acie and 21-year-old Wilson are working as mechanics. Sometime in 1931, Wilson left Chester for Rolla, Missouri, where his Aunt Ruth Fulbright Richards had been living for a while. There he went to work as the service manager for Superior Chevrolet. This picture from April of 1932 documents a visit home for Wilson. The 1940 census, taken in April, shows Acie working as a mechanic. It is unclear if he had his own shop at this time or if he was working for someone else. This picture from June of 1940 is of Acie with his mother Julia, his daughter Virginia, and barely visible is his grandson Jerry Michael Anderson. Virginia had married Vernon Anderson in 1937. This news item recalls a visit from July of 1940 and tells of Wilson and family and Acie and Grace visiting Acie's brothers and sisters' families in Perry County. This is from when Acie had to register for the World War II draft. He listed himself as an employee of W.C. Brown on Swanwick Street. The tragic, sudden death of Acie and Grace's daughter-in-law in late November of 1943 brought another major change to their lives. Wilson was left alone with 4 children between the ages of 16 months and 7 years old. Acie and Grace moved to Rolla to live with the family and help out with the children. In October of 1948, Acie lost his mother at the age of 92. This picture of a visit from Virginia was taken in the backyard of Wilson's house on Salem Avenue in Rolla. Here are Acie and Grace in the 1950 federal census. Acie had finally retired. During the 40s, he had worked the night shift as a creamery watchman, monitoring the operation of its steam engine overnight. This shot from about 1953 shows Acie and his grandson Roger after a successful fishing trip. This picture of Acie, Wilson, and Grace in the dining room on Salem Avenue is probably from about 1956. Here, Acie and Wilson are looking at a map in the living room on Salem Avenue. This picture of Acie holding his grandson Don is likely the last picture taken of him before his death on December 13, 1958. hope you enjoyed this.